Good afternoon. I'm going to call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Health, Environment, Civil Rights, and Engagement Committee for Monday, July 23rd, 2018. My name is Philippe Cunningham, and I am the City Council member for the 4th Ward and the chair of this wonderful committee. At the dais with me today are council members Cano, Schrader, Gordon, and Johnson. Just to share, for those of you who don't know, Council Vice President Jenkins is currently out of town right now at a Harvard Fellowship for local and state government officials. And so, or as we say around the council offices, she's getting fancy. So, but let the record reflect that we have a quorum. So, colleagues, we have 3 items on our agenda today, 2 consent and 1 discussion item. I would like to share that we're going to be adding an additional item to number 4, so that we can have a receive and file of a presentation from the Transgender Equity Council. So we're going to have that as a walk-on. Do I need a vote for that? Okay, great, thanks. Cool, moving right along, we'll dive into our 2 consent items. The first is a contract with Piece by Piece LLC for the 2018 Blueprint Approved Institute. And the second is accepting a grant from Washburn Center for Children in the amount of $300,000, $60,000 annually up to 5 years to address youth mental health needs at the health department's school-based clinics. Do committee members have any questions? All right, well, before I move on, I just want to take a quick moment. I said thank you during our agenda setting meeting, but I just also want to give another shout out to Barb Kyle and the folks in the health department for all their hard work with the school-based clinics. They are constantly fighting for grant money to be able to continue to expand the services. And for many, many young folks who utilize these school-based clinics, this is their only access to health care and mental health care. So thank you very, very much. So with that, seeing no questions, I move approval of the consent agenda. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. All right. Number 3, we have the Minneapolis's 2016 Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory Update and Energy Benchmarking Annual Report. Luke Hollenkamp, Sustainability Program Coordinator, and Katie Jones, Benchmarking Outreach and Policy Specialist, will be giving this presentation today. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Council members. Great to be here today. Before I start off, I'd like to introduce our new Sustainability Manager, whose first day is today, Kim Havey here. Kim, we're really excited to have him on board, and I'm sure in the coming days and weeks, many of you will have an opportunity to meet with him personally, and in no time at all, I'm sure Kim will be up here as well, addressing the committee. So, welcome, Kim. Thank you. We'd like to today present on 2 different topics, although they're very closely related. The Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory for the City of Minneapolis, the 2016 update, as well as our annual energy benchmarking report. Many of you are aware that the city has some very aggressive carbon reduction goals that we are striving to achieve. Our goals include a 15% reduction by 2015, a 30% reduction by 2025, and an 80% reduction by 2050. And those are all community-wide goals and set forth in the Climate Action Plan. This first slide here gives an update on how we are doing in achieving those goals. On the left side, you can see our greenhouse gas emissions, again, for the entire community, in millions of metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And then you can see all the years going back to 2006, which is our baseline. And last year, I was happy to present that our 2015 data, when it came in, showed that we had surpassed our 15% reduction target in 2015. That was actually, I believe, a 17.8% reduction. So we were very excited to meet that first target. And we've continued that downward trajectory since. We now have reduced emissions 20.4% since 2006. A lot of folks often ask, how are we doing in terms of progress towards our next goals? And there's many complicated answers to that, but what we can say is that our 30% reduction goal by 2025, we are on a trajectory to probably about hit that goal. One of the primary reasons is because the electricity that we're consuming as a city, being provided by Xcel Energy, is getting cleaner. There have been coal plants that have been retired recently, and we're adding more wind energy and solar energy to the grid. Those renewables have led to a decrease in electricity emissions, and using Excel's numbers, we're able to show that when those increases in renewables continue on through 2025, we will likely be at about that 30% reduction target. All of the other categories shown here, which includes our natural gas emissions, wastewater emissions, as well as solid waste emissions, those are all relatively constant, as I'll show you in a second with natural gas. But in particular, solid waste and wastewater treatment are smaller portions of our portfolio, but we're hoping to make progress on those as well. As I mentioned, natural gas is one of our large emission sources as well, and it soon will be our largest emissions source. This is some trend data going back to our 2006 baseline. And in blue here, you can see that emissions from electricity consumption have been steadily decreasing. That's both a result of reduced consumption of electricity, but even more so, a greener electricity mix provided to us. However, natural gas is remaining relatively constant. And in fact, you can see some year-over-year variation there. Natural gas consumption is largely dictated by the heating needs of buildings. And with colder winters that we may have in any given calendar year, we often see an increase in natural gas consumption. And the inverse also occurs. But what we can see is that with this trend, we expect in the next few years, electricity emissions will fall below that of which natural gas emissions are, and that will then become our largest emissions source.
Councilmember Gordon has a question or comment.
I just wanted to ask a little question to understand better about how we're doing our counting. So some of our electricity also comes from natural gas?
Yes, that's correct.
So in fact, some of those coal plants that closed were converted to natural gas, or at least one in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Do we count that as electricity then? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we were to, so it would be cleaner electricity if we shut down that plant and quit burning that. Yes, it wouldn't be anything to do with our natural gas.
Yes.
Okay.
Chair, council member, you're exactly right. The emissions from electricity generation, even if they're using natural gas to produce electricity, are shown in the electricity consumption profile here. So they're not double counted. The emissions from natural gas shown here in gray, those are the emissions that are coming from our buildings primarily, directly from building energy use, as well as industrial energy use as well, but not for electricity generation.
And most of that is for heat, or is all of that for heat?
The majority of it is for heat, although there is natural gas. It's also used for process equipment, for instance, heating water for breweries. Obviously, breweries are large energy consumers, and a lot of them use natural gas to heat the water that they use in the brewing process, as well as then they would burn natural gas to heat the physical building that they have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Taking a closer look at the 2016 data, again, we see that electricity is at 36% of our consumption, just a little bit more than 35%, which is from natural gas. And on-road transportation is a large source of emissions as well. What we can see here too is that we believe on-road transportation, as we're seeing many of the trends already, will electrify in the near future. And as it electrifies, we also hope that, and we would like to also give focus to having that electricity used for transportation coming from renewable sources as well. So we're not simply shifting that on-road transportation, the burning of gasoline, over to the electricity sector, but we're actually eliminating those emissions by having the electricity for vehicles coming from renewable resources.
I have a quick question if I can jump in. Can you explain any sort of connections that there are to the vision of electrifying not only the city's fleet, but also out in the community, and to make sure that it's renewable? Are there any mechanisms in place to ensure that we're going in that direction, or is it just something that we hope we will see?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think it's fair to say it's a little bit of both at this point. We as a city are somewhat limited in our role in the transportation sector, obviously, but I think we do have we can take a sizable role in places where we have jurisdiction authority. And in particular, we've had many conversations with our fleet services folks here at the city about the city's plans to electrify our vehicle fleet and ensuring that we use renewables whenever possible for that electrification. And through the Clean Energy Partnership, we've been talking with Xcel Energy recently about engaging in a pilot with them where they would be able to help provide some of that charging infrastructure so that the city could focus some of our resources on purchasing electric vehicles, but then also when they're providing the infrastructure, making sure the infrastructure allows us to use renewables as much as possible. One example would be going above and beyond anything like the Renewable Connect Green Tariff, but actually charging our vehicles at night when there is surplus renewable electricity on the grid. So connecting the needs for electric vehicles with the actual availability of renewable resources at the specific time that those are needed.
Thank you.
And combined, electricity and natural gas consumption are 71% of our emissions. That represents really our building sector. So overall, our greenhouse gas emissions as a city are driven by the power, the energy that our buildings use. If we dive a little bit deeper into the building sector specifically, the data actually shows that commercial and industrial buildings emit the lion's share of emissions, much more than residential buildings. This is one of the reasons that, again, in the Clean Energy Partnership, we're talking a lot with the utilities about commercial energy programs. What can we do to help our commercial customers reduce their energy consumption or switch over to renewable resources? Something that's telling is that individually, electricity or natural gas emissions in the commercial industrial sector are actually greater individually than the combined electricity and natural gas emissions in the residential sector. Now, residential sector continues to be a very important sector to look at. It has a housing affordability component, and obviously energy costs for consumers are a very big concern. So we really need to look at both, but we will see a lot of our emissions reductions come from the commercial building sector in the future. And that will be very important to meet our 80% reduction goal by 2050.
All right, I have Councilmember Schrader.
Well, thank you so much for pointing that out. And I absolutely agree. We need to focus on where we're going to have the biggest impact. But absolutely, if we can be starting to look at having some intention around measuring residential, I think that there's a desire for that. So with that kind of important, if there's a way to start moving on kind of some of the easy projects, it'd be kind of good to start moving there to finally meet our goals.
And Chair, Councilmember, that's it's a great segue to the next slide I have here, which is there is a big caveat in these numbers. It is that multifamily buildings really inhabit both the commercial and industrial sector. As of right now, we don't really have great data that shows how that sector is performing. And again, a lot of that data, if it is available, isn't often available even to building owners or to renters. Often it can be that data is only in the possession of one of those parties. And that makes it difficult for, I think, both building owners and renters to make wise energy decisions and together collectively make those decisions. An example of why multifamily energy and the resulting emissions might be in both categories would be thinking of a large apartment building. Many large apartment buildings now sub-meter, or rather provide an individual meter, one electric meter per unit. So a renter pays their own electricity bill. But that same building, let's say there's 100 units, may have 100 meters, but may have one natural gas meter. That's because the heating system may be centrally provided by the building owner. And in a situation like that, all those small individual unit electric meters are likely being classified in the residential buildings category here. And that one very large gas meter, since it's so large, actually has more characteristics of a commercial building, is likely being reported in the commercial and industrial building sector. So multifamily buildings inhabit this space between that we don't have a lot of information on and don't have a lot of knowledge on. And because of that, it's really hard to assist that sector by providing type of reliable data and also providing programs that the city may be able to develop.
I want to jump in with a quick question here. Where are the intersections of the energy benchmarking work and the Green Business Cost Share program? Where are the intersections there?
Sure, maybe Katie, do you want to step in for a second here?
Yeah, we actually provide a little bit more incentive for the buildings that are benchmarking within the Green Business Cost Share. So there's an added dollar amount and added percentage amount that in terms of the match that these buildings can qualify for. And on top of that, the benchmarked buildings have been really the ones we've been targeting with the Minneapolis Building Energy Challenge. And so if you're part of the challenge and you're benchmarking, you get a little bit extra incentive as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
So before we move on to an update on the commercial energy benchmarking annual report, I'd like to just pause here and see if there's any other questions or comments on the greenhouse gas emissions inventory for this year. I did forget to mention one thing, which is that we've been talking about 2016 data. And the reason we don't have 2017 data yet is because a lot of the data sources we use to compile our inventory come from other partner government agencies, such as the Minnesota Department of Transportation, Metropolitan Council, and some of those organizations need some time to collect all of their data as well. So it's unfortunately lags a little bit, but it also allows us to have the most accurate data possible when we do report it.
All right. It looks like we don't have any questions. Please feel free to continue.
Okay.
Chair, council members, thank you so much for having me today to talk about the Minneapolis Energy Benchmarking Program. My name is Katie Jones, and this measuring energy is the thing I love to do, so I'm happy to talk about it. So first, I want to start off with what is benchmarking. I'd like to actually take a second to reflect upon, what are things that you track in your life? Do you maybe track your steps? Maybe you track calories, or maybe you track your MPG in your vehicle. We need to do the same thing with energy in buildings. If we're not aware of how buildings are using energy, there's really no hope for us actually achieving our goals. So energy benchmarking is creating metrics around efficiency for buildings. So you can see here I've got a picture that has a bunch of yellow stickers on buildings. So if you've ever gone shopping for an appliance, such as a washing machine or a dryer, you'll have those energy guide stickers that are on there. So those energy guide stickers tell you how efficient those appliances are. We're essentially doing that for buildings. Now I know these big, office buildings would probably not like a giant sticker on them. We're gathering the same amount of information and presenting that in different ways. But that it's really those high level efficiency metrics are what we're after. So how are we getting those metrics? We're combining two silos of information that have never actually been brought together before. One silo is the meter information. So the utilities have this information as well as the building owner. The other set of information is the building characteristics. So, the owner has that information, and the city has a couple of those characteristics about those buildings. The building manager has those characteristics. They haven't usually brought them together to provide efficiency metrics before this ordinance. And so what we're doing, bringing together those pieces of information and creating high-level energy efficiency metrics. The first one is the energy use intensity. It's the energy use per square foot per year. And that just allows us to be able to compare buildings to one another, taking away that size factor. You can see here we're using all the meter consumption information and the area from the building characteristics. The second high-level metric is the Energy Star score. This is a 1 to 100 metric that makes it very easy for people to understand how efficient buildings are. 1 is inefficient, 100 is efficient. And we're using all of the building characteristics. So it's the number of computers, the occupancy, the scheduling, the things that really make up a building and how a building operates in a unique way. So I've gotten this question before of how does the city get the data? So I thought I'd try to do a high level of how that works. So basically the building owner and manager, again, like I said, they have access to those two silos of information, and they are tasked with reporting that information to Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is an online tool provided by the EPA. It's free, and it's a nationally recognized tool. And so the building owner and manager is responsible for putting that information in there. They can also use other tools to get that information in there. So they can contract with third-party providers that can kind of do some automation to alleviate some of the work. And then also we've been working with the utilities to make more of a streamlined process for getting the monthly meter readings directly into Portfolio Manager and alleviate that amount of effort from the building manager. After that data gets into Portfolio Manager, the building owners and managers then click a link to submit the data directly to the city. There's some high-level metrics that come from that. The city, we do some quality control on it, and then we publish it to the public. Just wanted to provide some context or a little bit around benchmarking. So there are more than 20 other cities throughout the country that are doing benchmarking. Minneapolis was the 7th in the nation and the 1st in the Midwest. We beat Chicago, so I want to give ourselves a little pat on the back there. And so we're up. We're like many other cities. We're doing this good work. I just want to point out that we have peers, and we're also trying to learn from them as well. The last thing I want to point out is that other cities benchmark various different types of buildings. So here in Minneapolis, we benchmark commercial buildings and public buildings. In other cities, they also benchmark multifamily buildings as well. So as part of our ordinance, as I mentioned, it's private buildings and public buildings that are part of this. Private buildings over 50,000 square feet and public over 25,000 square feet. And just to give some context, here are two buildings that are about 50,000 square feet, the City of Lakes building and the Lunds and Byerly's in Uptown. So you can kind of get a picture of that. The fun part is the results. So we've got more than 400 buildings who submitted their benchmarking data. That represents 80% of our commercial building space. So we actually have a lot of data of the commercial building space in the city. We have a high median Energy Star score of 75 and a site EUI median of 80. The thing that that's probably a little more surprising, if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, it shows the energy use by year built. So on the y-axis is the energy use intensity. Each one of those dots is a building, and the year built is on the x-axis. So you can see that there's no real correlation or trend between year built and energy use intensity. We were kind of surprised by that initially as well, but it's actually, these results are very similar to many other cities. So these are all office buildings, so we're normalizing for property type. But this basically indicates that even if a building's old, you can't assume that it's inefficient. And that kind of makes sense intuitively. We at City Hall, we no longer have the boilers from 1893 or whenever. We have updated our heating and cooling equipment since then. As far as the trends go, we're making progress. We have reduced our weather normalized energy use by 1.7%. So that's a good trend to see. The Energy Star score median has gone up 2 points, and our total water use has gone down nearly 6%. Breaking that down into private and public buildings, our private buildings we've reduced over 3 years by 3.4%, and I've broken that down into various sectors within the building industry. So you can see that parking has seen a giant decrease, and that's due to LED lighting. Parking garages are most of their load comes from lighting. They don't have any heating and cooling, and so when they change those out, you can see a giant decrease. So we're actually trying to use this as a motivational tool that, hey, other parking garages, if you're not seeing this trend, your peers are, and hopefully motivating them that way. But anyway, there are a number of other sectors that are seeing reductions. There are a few that are showing a little bit of an increase, and so we're trying to talk to them a little bit more in our outreach. Public buildings, we have data for 5 years for the city, county, Metro Transit for 3 years, and then parks and schools. Over those 5 years, we've seen a collective reduction of 3%, and the city is that's definitely part of that downward trend. So we don't only analyze the buildings as a collective or summarize them. We produce this information by individual building. So on our website, we actually have this interactive dashboard. So building owners can put in their address and put in the property type and be able to compare, their office to other offices or hospital to other hospitals to get some context as to their own efficiency. And as Luke had mentioned, so we've been talking about 2016 data. The 2017 data will be out in the fall. You mentioned the Green Business Cost Share, so I wanted to touch a little bit on the related programs. So yeah, we do use this building list of 400 buildings that are a significant portion of our commercial building space for targeting with that program. And I think we've been pretty successful there. We've also had the Minneapolis Building Energy Challenge, which has motivated buildings to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 15% by 2020 is the goal. And then we've been offering custom assistance, going into individual buildings, meeting with them one-on-one and saying, we know each building is unique and individual, and trying to provide them with resources that will match their needs. So just wanted to say thank you. And I also wanted to point out the many different people who work on this program, including obviously Luke, and then Nadia Khan and Patrick Hanlon in Environmental Services. And then we have Don Bailey and Jenny Edwards and Brady Steigoff, who are contractors with us. Happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. This is great. I really appreciate this. I was curious about work we're doing to benchmark the residential buildings. I noticed that some of the other cities, you say, do benchmarking of residential buildings and multifamily. I thought there was even money in the budget to do that. Maybe it didn't make it through the final cut when we raised the franchise fee. I think there was supposed to be $74,000 or something, maybe to study it, but I'm not sure. It's just a foggy memory. Are we? And I do know that when we passed the commercial benchmarking ordinance, Elizabeth Clayton and I and others were saying eventually we're gonna take off little pieces. We started with public buildings, and we're moving with private and commercial, and we're going to start to get to residential, at least the big multifamily buildings, to benchmark those. How's that work going?
Chair, Councilmember, I think the work is going great. We as staff have really over the last, I think, few years done some prep work looking at that multifamily building sector, again, which is not currently covered by the ordinance, and have this has been a conversation we've had amongst several different departments of the city, so we can bring together the right data and resources and expertise to look at that, and we would welcome having a larger conversation about a potential policy in that arena in the future, and would be more than happy to work with council members on that.
So how about if I give you the backup of a staff direction from the committee here, or maybe not necessarily the backup, but the motivation? I'm not sure how you guys treat these staff directions, but so I'd like to move that we direct sustainability staff to work with other departments, including reg services, health, and community planning and economic development. I guess on a comprehensive set of energy disclosure proposals for residential buildings. And we can see if that results in the ordinance, like I imagine it might, that we are now, or there probably some other pathway. So I'll put that motion. Hopefully it was clear and I can email it out too.
All right, Councilmember Gordon has made a motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I generally like this idea of the motion. I guess just a question for the author, a clarification. Is this multi-unit residential? I would assume so.
So the way I phrased it was just residential buildings. I actually think it might be really neat if we had an easy way for individuals to kind of track that and know, or maybe there's even duplexes, but we could specify it. I think we've always talked about looking at the bigger buildings first, and certainly the way we did the commercial, we rolled it out in different ways, but everybody talks about multifamily.
That's helpful, and I mean, if you have creative ideas too on single-family homes as well, that would be interesting. If there's easy ways to go about doing that aren't going to be burdensome for residents and that might draw on more data, that'd be great too.
It could even be, if I could, it could even be something in the truth and sale of housing. So there's a lot of information that you're supposed to share, and maybe there could be, so I want to leave it pretty broad, just in case that's something that people could actually think of, oh, I'm going to share this information when my house sells at least or not. I don't know. That's just an idea.
All right, is there any further discussion on the motion that's on the table by Councilmember Gordon? All right, seeing no further discussion, those all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That motion carries. All right, thank you so much. And are there any questions related to the presentation that might be left? All right. Thank you so much for taking the time. This was very thorough and very clear. So thank you very much for taking the time to do that. So I move to receive and file Minneapolis's 2016 greenhouse gas emissions inventory update and energy benchmarking annual report. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that item is received and filed. All right. Thank you so much. And now our final item, discussion item for today, is going to be a presentation on the Transgender Equity Council. I see a few folks here for it. So we have Freya here, Nikki, and Louise, I think. So please state your name, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, Chair and council members, committee members. We'll take just a moment to get our presentation on the desktop here.
While we actually are pulling that up, I'll take a quick moment here to just say how excited and proud I am of this presentation. It hasn't even happened yet, and I already feel super proud and excited because this is a really amazing group of folks who are really trying to help us figure out a roadmap to be able to take on transgender equity in a whole new way. And so it's still a fledgling city commission. So I'm really excited to see where they are thus far. The floor is yours, Freya.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Freya Richmond. I'm a co-facilitator of the City of Minneapolis Transgender Equity Council. I'm an artist, a parent, a resident of Minneapolis, and I'm part of the trans community. It's been my honor to volunteer my service as part of this committee. In recent years, transgender Americans have been more visible than ever. Awareness has increased with more trans figures and celebrities in the public eye. But although public understanding of trans people has developed significantly, these strides have not necessarily led to a safer or more prosperous life for many in our community. It is well documented that trans people experience higher levels of bullying and bias crimes, especially for trans people of color, mistreatment by law enforcement, are subject to discrimination in employment, housing, and healthcare, and are far more likely to experience poverty and homelessness than the rest of our population. Suicide attempts among the transgender population are disproportionately higher than the general population, startlingly so. A 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey found that 11% of trans Minnesotans were unemployed and 34% were living in poverty. Over a quarter have been fired or denied a job because they are trans. Minnesota and Minneapolis have progressive laws on the books, but we still have a long way to go before our city is truly safe and equitable for trans people. In March 2014, the City of Minneapolis founded an internal trans issues work group to examine issues and make policy recommendations around criminal justice, employment, health, civic participation, and public spaces. Under that group's leadership, the city began the annual Trans Equity Summit, which is now approaching its 5th year of convening policymakers, community leaders, and the public around making our city more inclusive. Last February, the city established the Transgender Equity Council, an advisory board composed of community members like myself and representatives from the city, county, public schools, and parks. We have met monthly to, in the council's words, study issues, courses of action, policies, and programs that affect the quality of life for transgender residents and make recommendations to city departments and the city council. The Transgender Equity Council aims to serve as a liaison between Minneapolis and the transgender community and make every effort to ensure the diverse viewpoints and interests of the transgender residents of Minneapolis are reflected in the course of its work. To these ends, the Transgender Equity Council, the TEC, has selected 3 focus areas that provide an opportunity for successful city intervention: city policies and trainings, housing, and visibility and community building. I will take a moment to describe some of the priorities that are emerging from these focus areas. The city's power to drive education around gender awareness, sensitivity, and inclusiveness includes not only internal trainings, but also grant making and contracting to ensure city staff and outside contractors adhere to principles of trans inclusion and gender expansiveness. The TEC believes the city should, first, require all city employees to participate in annual comprehensive training around trans inclusion and sensitivity to gender nonconforming and non-binary individuals to be provided by expert facilitators and include training and inclusion requirements in all city contracts and grants. Second, utilize the Transgender Equity Council as a resource when the city is forming requests for proposals to review submissions that are related to trans equity work. We understand that the city's Human Resource Department is currently launching efforts to institute cultural agility as a job success factor for all employees. We believe one component to creating and maintaining a diverse workforce is to strive to create an environment where employees demonstrate an awareness and sensitivity to the needs and concerns of individuals from different perspectives, cultures, and backgrounds. It is our recommendation the City Council request a staff directive to review and gather information on all city training that touches trans equity and seek input from the TEC about the scope and content of these programs. Third, utilize the city's role in inspection and enforcement to tackle some of the practical applications of city policy, like ensuring businesses open to the public aren't policing bathroom usage along perceived gender lines. 1 in 10 trans Minnesotans has been denied access to a bathroom within the past year, and almost 2/3 of survey respondents reported having avoided the restroom in public due to this constant threat. Finally, invest in city facilities that reflect the community we claim to be by converting more gendered restrooms into gender-neutral restrooms and developing a design standard for construction of new city and public buildings vis-a-vis restrooms and other facilities that reflects best practices for inclusivity, with the aim to make all facilities serve any user without a need for segregation according to a gender binary. Housing is one of the biggest crises facing Minneapolis today, and the lack of affordable housing impacts the trans community especially hard. The 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey found that over 30% of trans Minnesotans had experienced homelessness at some point in their lives, and 1 in 10 had experienced homelessness due to gender discrimination in the past year. These are stark figures when coupled with the overall trends about the affordability of housing in Minneapolis. The Transgender Equity Council has prepared feedback for the Minneapolis 2040 Comprehensive Plan. While some of these comments are specific to the plan, they also offer possibilities for city action outside of the plan. Nowhere in this plan do we recognize the epidemic of homelessness in the trans community, which is nearly 2.5 times higher than the general population. Where other communities are identified within the homelessness policies, such as youth and families, the plan should include safe spaces for LGBTQ individuals of all ages, as well as their families, such as life partners and children. Some policy areas should expand language to be more inclusive of other marginalized communities, such as number 39, fair housing, and number 41, tenant protections. In these instances, language should be crafted to include gender identity. Next, the city should partner with or create a network of local landlords who are committed to a stated policy of inclusion and non-discrimination for LGBTQ individuals. Further, the city should implement standards of inclusion for homeless shelters and mandate staff to attend regular trainings on gender sensitivity and best practices. Finally, the city should ensure that anti-discrimination protections in housing, such as homeless shelters, and rentals, such as duplexes, are as strong as possible due to federal and state inaction on the matter. The city can play a major role in education and awareness simply by talking about trans issues. The city of Minneapolis can lead the way, actively building bridges of understanding in the community about gender inclusivity. The TEC believes the city should create a media campaign about our trans neighbors. Cities like Vancouver and Washington, D.C. have led public education strategies to combat some of the most pervasive myths about trans people. Second, incorporate images of trans and gender expansive people into everyday city communications, on web pages and in city collateral to demonstrate that we are seen and valued. Third, identify nodes of community for trans and gender expansive people, such as galleries, art spaces, cafes, and cabarets, and help support their growth and development. At one TEC meeting, Police Chief Rondo recognized our need to maintain community gathering spaces for queer culture and expressed his concern upon seeing spaces that had been long-time gathering places for trans community closing their doors. The recent closing of Cafe Southside, Patrick's Cabaret, and Intermedia Arts were major losses for the queer culture in our community and in our city. Finally, explore options for city support of community priorities such as an LGBTQ community center, as we see in Milwaukee, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C., which would provide education, health and wellness programs, arts, entertainment, and cultural events, as well as a range of supportive services for youth, adults, and family. Minneapolis should join these and other cities as a leader in LGBTQ public awareness and community building. I'd like to thank the City Council for taking the step to create the Transgender Equity Council. We are honored to help you advance trans equity in our community, and we aim to solidify Minneapolis's leadership around trans inclusion. We are committed to helping advise the City Council on policy formation and implementation of these proposals. Thank you very much. We have some handouts today. We have some examples of visibility campaign from Vancouver and Washington, D.C., a roster of the Transgender Equity Council, and a copy of these remarks for your review.
Great. Thank you, Freya. Do any of my colleagues have any questions? Well, I'll go ahead and just say, wow, that was an amazing presentation. It was very clear with the recommendations. I mean, when the Transgender Equity Council was pulled together, it was really in hopes of being able to come to this space here and be able to get some clear direction from the Transgender Equity Council and going forward about how can we build a strong relationship with the trans and gender nonconforming community and the city, and how do we help bridge that together. So thank you so much for taking this. I'll be taking this into deep advisement, and also recommend you reach out and share this with the mayor's office as well, as we are considering budget season. So seeing no questions on this, I would like to move to receive and file this item. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. 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 Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item is passed. I would like to say before we wrap up, to remind all of our riveted viewers at home to please get involved, reach out to your city council member, make your voice be heard, and go to community events as often as possible, because we need to get plugged in and build community together. And on that note, this meeting is adjourned.